So much debate each and every week about the college football playoff rankings, except for one spot. So Georgia's got it locked down at number one. They've proven to be the best team, at least to date. They're undefeated, of course, heading into a rivalry game against Georgia Tech as a 5-touchdown favorite. We got Big Dog Brett on the line. You can catch him right here on YouTube, tracking those Bulldogs. Hey, Brett, how you doing?
Doing great today. How you doing, Mark?
I am doing well. Good to see you and glad to have you on here to talk about the Bulldogs. Let's start, though, outside of Georgia camp with the latest in the SEC East. And, of course, the huge news that Dan Mullen has been let go at Florida. So famously, he made a comment just a few weeks ago regarding recruiting and wasn't taken too well. It could have been taken out of context. I don't know. I see both sides of it, but it's not necessarily a message you want to be sending to your fan base that you're not recruiting full go all the time, pedal to the metal like Kirby Smart. And obviously Dan Mullen was getting beaten upside the head in terms of recruiting, and it's shown most recently on the field. So how is the Georgia fan base reacting to the Florida news and Dan Mullen and his dismissal?
We're devastated. I mean, not only did they fire Todd Grantham, which is probably one of the best defensive coordinators I think they've had down there. I think now they fired Dan Mullen. It seems to be a curse at Florida where if you win your side of the division, within a year or two, they're going to fire you. Same thing happened to Mr. McElwain. Went out and won the division a couple of times, and you know what? They just won't tolerate that kind of success down at Florida. It's a real shame.
So the case for Dan Mullen can be made on both sides. I don't think anybody gains that kind of position without knowing football. And obviously his mind in offensive football is one of the best in the business, developing quarterbacks, play calling, building an offensive system. And he had success at Mississippi State, again, considering the circumstances and the challenges to win there, moves to Florida. And ironically, in the same season that he gains all this, and it came from me as well, so I'm not going to take myself out of this category, all sorts of issues that I won't detail, but if you need to do your homework out there, against Texas A&M, against Missouri, in the bowl game against Oklahoma, a lot of buffoonery off the field. They beat Georgia. They won the East. They gave Alabama, in some regards, its toughest game of the season. So he had a successful year, but it was a year filled with all sorts of issues and challenges. So now he moves on. But what is the rivalry in terms of Georgia, Florida, and where that stands? Because the Florida people are going to hang on the national championship difference, but Georgia obviously is a much better program as of right now.
Well, I mean, to give as much respect as we can to Dan Mullen. I mean, while we do like to, rib each other back and forth, Dan Mullen really is a great coach. Now, I'm not sure if the head coaching position is the best position for him, but as far as, being able to put together a game plan, I think the guy does an outstanding job. I think some of the things of head coaching kind of maybe get away from him a little bit. Recruiting is definitely one of the things that he seems to struggle with, and he's not well known for doing. But as far as developing quarterbacks, I mean, he's got a great reputation. So, hats off to what he was able to do for the program. And they did go out and they won a division. And, they have one of the best tight ends of all time at Florida, and Kyle Pitts. And you can't really take that away from him. And if you look at the contrast between Kyle Trask the year prior and then the Kyle Trask the year where they won that division, where they made it to Atlanta, you could really see how he developed and how he was molded. He didn't just magically come out of spring practice and all of that stuff clicked for him. So Dan Mullen did do a great job in developing a lot of the quarterbacks. But unfortunately, when you're working in a Power 5 school, especially a prominent SEC school, you've got to have all of the pieces to be able to put it together. And Dan Mullen just doesn't seem to have those. And unfortunately for Florida fans, the rivalry between Georgia, while it is, Georgia does lead the series right now, I tell everybody this: I don't want your team to be down. I don't want your team to turn into, say, a Vanderbilt. I want your team to be an LSU of old, an Auburn of old, a Tennessee of old, and Florida of old. And that way, when we play you, the game does mean more. So if you beat a number 2 or number 3 ranked Clemson when they're really, really good, that's a different team than the team we saw at the beginning of the season. So I want to see those teams do well. I just don't feel like Dan Mullen is the guy for that. As far as the rivalry goes, that's always going to be one of the classic rivalries in college football. There's tons of people that show up and just – you can actually – they do the pop-up projector screens, and you can watch them out in different parks and parking lots. It's quite an environment. Not necessarily one I would bring my kids to, but it's a very exciting environment. I'm excited to see who they're going to find as a head coach to fill that role. I absolutely believe that they're going to be looking for somebody who can not only coach and develop players, but somebody who can really recruit those players and is willing to take on the task of recruiting in Florida. Right now, there's no reason why the only SEC program in Florida is not dominant in recruiting. FSU's not a powerhouse right now. Miami's not a powerhouse right now. You know, you can make comments about UCF if you like, but there's no reason why the Florida Gators in Gainesville, which is practically centrally located in Florida, or as centrally as you can, they should be absolutely killing it in recruiting. And for the life of me, I can't understand why. If Florida wants to become dominant again, and for lack of a better term, a way of saying it, to make this rivalry mean more than it used to make it more exciting, you can't just have the X's and O's. You got to have the Jimmies and the Joes. And right now, they don't have the Joes. So they got to fix that first and foremost.
We've got Big Dog Brett on the line from right here on YouTube. So you just go up to your search panel right there. You type in Big Dog Brett and check out his work on Georgia football. So shifting gears in terms of head coaches, Kirby Smart, there's little to criticize, but still people find a way, and it has to do with the national championship. Now, I come to his defense all the time because I don't think that there's been enough time. Not that he couldn't have won one, of course, in 2017. And obviously he showed that he can get a team to the brink of a national championship. He can basically win a national championship. If you can establish a 2-score lead in the final game and take it to overtime, you've developed the team and brought them to a place to win a national championship. But he's had a couple missteps in big games. The recruiting has been just incredibly lights out. So Kirby Smart seems to have everything working this year, and this seems to be the year.
As a Georgia fan, unfortunately, especially if you're a fan of the sports in Georgia, we have believed for a very long time that there's a curse. And it always seems like we get 5 feet from the finish line and can't quite get there for whatever reason, whether it's the Atlanta Braves, the Atlanta Falcons. A few years back, the Atlanta United soccer team did win the MLS, so that was exciting. But this year, I think seeing the Braves win the World Series kind of helped break that mindset. But as a Georgia fan, you always have that nagging feeling in the back of your head, and it always seems like it comes down to Georgia, Alabama. So we're going to see another classic Georgia-Alabama. What we have seen in years past is when Georgia plays Alabama, if we put together a good, solid game plan, we can take Alabama to the wire just as good as anybody can. In the national championship that Alabama won against Georgia, that was hard fought by both teams. Took me back to the Aaron Murray days where Georgia and Alabama's playing, and we get a tip ball and we catch it on like the 2 or 3 yard line. Aaron Murray, high completion percentage in the red zone. Another pass, if we drop that pass, statistically speaking, it's very likely the next pass would have been a caught ball or a touchdown. And then they go on to play Notre Dame. Alabama absolutely trashed Notre Dame. It's likely Georgia would have done the same. So Georgia's got all these things in the back of its head. But I really feel like this Georgia team is built different this year. The mentality is different. Kirby Smart seems to be a little more open to allowing the offense to open up, which was nice. Some of us kind of felt that it was a little bit conservative, and a lot of Georgia fans questioned his choice with going with Jake Fromm rather than Justin Fields. We obviously saw what Justin Fields was able to do at Ohio State. But while we didn't win that national championship, I really feel like that set the tone and the expectation for what Kirby Smart was looking for out of the program. This also translated over to the recruiting trail, which has been dominant ever since. Georgia has tons of talent all over the field. In this particular year, you can see it on defense. So for me, seeing what we're going to go up with against Alabama and then going back and looking at the stats with Stetson Bennett, I know a lot of people are really, really hard on Stetson Bennett because of what happened in that first Alabama game. He struggled during the regular season. JT Daniels comes in and plays the role of savior. But if you actually go back and you look at the stats, his stats are pretty strong. It looks like he would be as good as JT Daniels on paper than what we saw out of JT Daniels last year. A lot of injury concerns with JT Daniels, lack of play time is a concern with JT Daniels. And at this point in the season, it's likely too late, in my opinion, to be able to get him up to speed quick enough to put him in a championship caliber game and just throw all of our marbles in that basket and just be like, we're going to ride with JT Daniels. At this point, it really has to be Stetson Bennett.
Yeah, so as much of the valuation that people have based on recruiting rankings and based on expectation rather than what's been produced on the field, meaning that Stetson Bennett's always been a Georgia guy, wanted to go to Georgia, but he's a walk-on. He was a 3-star. That brings with it a certain perception of how good he is versus JT Daniels is a 5-star, started at USC, expected to be a great quarterback. So people look at him as he is a great quarterback versus Stetson Bennett is a fill-in guy.
It's true that whenever JT Daniels was recruited, he was number 3 in the nation behind Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And that was after he reclassified. When he classified the first time, he was actually number 1 in the country. So there's a lot of talent there. However, the college football is full of 5-star players that end up being a bust. It's actually more likely that a 5-star player will become a bust than will become a elite running back. If we go back to the years of Todd Gurley and Keith Marshall was actually rated higher than Todd Gurley, but we know how that turned out. So there's something.
Although he wasn't a bust, to be fair.
He wasn't a bust. Fair enough. He wasn't a bust, but he wasn't quite as good as Todd Gurley. So I think sometimes as fans and analysts, we really put too much faith in the recruiting aspect of it instead of looking at what we have on the field. And I can make a great comparison. If we go back and we look at Joe Burrow, he wasn't lights out, coming out of high school. He wasn't lights out his first 2 or 3 years. Took a big chance in going to LSU. People were actually telling him, don't go to LSU. You're going to do nothing but hand the ball off. They're a run-heavy team. Guy goes down there and wins a national championship. So the question is on what part of the spectrum is Stetson Bennett going to fall? And is he going to fall closer to the higher side, which it looks to be the case? But unfortunately, I think Georgia fans have that stigmatism of watching Stetson Bennett. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize this. Stetson Bennett actually played on the same team as Jake Fromm. So he was back up to Jake Fromm. And guess who else was on that team that everybody loves? George Pickens and Dominic Blaylock. All of those guys were on the same team together. So they've been there a long, long time. Stetson Bennett has a wealth of knowledge from playing at Georgia that JT Daniels doesn't have yet. Now, he may get it, but not at this point. I think JT Daniels may go on to become an outstanding quarterback, but I think a couple of things are factoring into that. Is how Stetson Bennett has played in the past in some of the bigger games. That scares Georgia fans. And also the fact that he doesn't have the super 5-star phenom rating. And I think they're letting that get ahead of where his talent really lies.
Got Big Dog Brett on the line from YouTube. Catch him right here on this platform. So just type Big Dog Brett up into the search panel, and you'll find him right here on YouTube talking Georgia football as the Bulldogs prepare for their finale against Georgia Tech. But I wanted to take it, continue this conversation with Alabama, because that's everybody's aim, and it's been talked about all season. You've got your folks that think it's going to be an epic classic, and you've got your folks that think Georgia's just too good, flat out too good this year, this Georgia edition. The one thing I would say in Alabama's struggles, it seems to be an offensive line issue that maybe they've cleaned up to a certain extent, but that's why they struggled against LSU and Texas A&M among some other teams. So obviously Georgia's dominated everybody since Clemson. That was a good game, close game. Alabama's had its issues against the likes of Florida, LSU, Texas A&M. So your thoughts about where the advantages lie in the matchups against Bama?
So Georgia obviously is going to want to lean on its defense, but Georgia has a really solid offense. A lot of people kind of discount it and probably shouldn't. Alabama's averaging 44 points a game. Georgia's averaging 40. Alabama's got a pretty solid defense, but it's nowhere near the caliber of Georgia. You know, they're allowing almost 20 points a game versus Georgia allowing just over 7.5. So it's pretty difficult to weigh those two out on a number scale. But one of the things I keep looking at is whenever you see that Georgia played some of the same teams and the scores were wildly different. Georgia and Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida. Scores were wildly different. I understand the transitive property doesn't necessarily apply in college football. Alabama seems to want to throw the ball quite a bit more than they pass, and Georgia's extremely balanced. Georgia's weakness, at least against some of the opponents we've played, seems to be the deep ball threat, the deep ball coverage. Georgia's strength lies in its defensive line, especially in Jordan Davis. They're going to have to account for Jordan Davis. Watching how much I have seen the Alabama quarterback scramble and run, I'm really concerned that he's going to have difficulty against Georgia. Georgia seems to do really well against running quarterbacks, whether it's Mr. Ritter from Cincinnati, Ian Book from Notre Dame. The running quarterbacks seem to struggle. I think I can't remember the exact number of times that we sacked the Clemson quarterback, but I think it was 5+. If you go back to the last game Georgia played before CSU, I believe we played Tennessee. I think he was sacked 5 times plus. He was pretty mobile. Georgia kind of has a great plan for not just getting after the quarterback, but managing to contain them. And that's going to play a big factor. What's that?
Bo Nix.
Yeah, Bo Nix. Yeah.
Yeah, they took care of those guys.
So that doesn't concern me. It's the deep ball threat and the quick strike. That was a concern against Tennessee. And there were quite a few times where I felt like they had receivers that were open. If they'd had maybe a little better of a quarterback, more experienced, or better receivers like Mechie, who can put himself in a little better position, that's going to be a problem. If Georgia can maintain possession, if Georgia can come out and continue to keep their foot on the gas, I think it's going to be a good game. I could still see Georgia winning this game by 10 points. But I think for fans that think this is going to be a blowout game, I don't agree with that assessment. I think Alabama's got a really solid football team. They got a lot of talent on that field. Nick Saban is arguably the greatest coach of all time. And that's what you're going up against. There's only been one assistant that's ever beat him. And it's an impressive resume. So you got to contend with all that. To throw your hands up and say, oh, Georgia's going to kill them. Well, that's what we're going to tell each other. But if we're going to be objective, you got to say they've got a lot of weapons. We've got a lot of weapons. What's going to happen? I think it's really going to come down to Georgia stopping the explosive downfield passing. If we can stop that, we'll do well.
Talking Georgia football, we got Big Dog Brett on the line. Check him out here on YouTube. And, of course, the Bulldogs are at 11-0, number 1 in the country. So your playoff rankings don't mean a whole lot when it comes to Georgia football. They're in good shape. They're just waiting to see how 2, 3, and 4 line up. Georgia Tech's coming up this weekend. I've been watching football for 40-plus years. This rivalry's been in Georgia's hands most of the time. There have been some spots where Georgia Tech's been the better team and the better program, but it's been a long, long time since that has been the case. I don't know when the last time they won. It had to have been 8 or 9 years ago, something in that range. And again, Georgia wins the majority of games by far. There's no comparison in the programs right now. but it's still matched up as it is with Florida, Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville, and Clemson, South Carolina as one of those ACC, SEC games on the last weekend of the season. So, Brad, I'll ask you, what does this game mean, or in broader senses, what is the Georgia Tech rivalry at this point? I know it's not. I know it's a mismatch on the field, but what are the fan bases? What's the overlap of these teams, these schools, the recruiting, all that?
Well, the Georgia Tech fans, in my opinion, are typically Georgia Tech fans right up until about the time they play Georgia, and then after they play Georgia, you don't see them anymore. It's not to trash talk Georgia Tech fans. There's a lot of great people out there, Georgia Tech fans. Unfortunately, they picked the wrong team. Georgia has been playing Georgia Tech since November 4th of 1893. So this is a rivalry that's extremely old. And by the way, Georgia Tech won that game, so we'll give you guys credit for that. Only 13 other teams have met more times than Georgia versus Georgia Tech. Auburn's one of them, in my opinion. So the current overall record right now is 67-39. If you look back, I think Georgia Tech's won this game maybe 6 times in the past 20 years or so, maybe more, 30 years, somewhere in there. And it's been pretty tough for Georgia Tech to get out there and outclass and beat Georgia on the field. And it doesn't matter whether we play in Atlanta or we play in Athens. This is just what they call clean old-fashioned hate. If you watch this game, it does. For years and years, the Georgia Tech ran the triple option, and Georgia fans hated it because we would almost always end up with injuries from knees. From the Georgia Tech players often would dive at the Georgia players' knees, and so it was considered, I guess, kind of classless. And so it helped fuel that rivalry. And we've actually seen a few times where things have kind of emotions have ran a little high. If I go back a couple of years ago, we look at George Pickens actually got into an altercation with Mr. Swilling. A lot of people kind of down-talked Pickens for doing that. But it did appear that Mr. Swilling on tape initiated that on a couple of plays prior and continued to do so. Referees didn't see it, so they couldn't really react. At a certain point, Mr. Pickens had enough, and then we all know what happened after that. But this rivalry is great because there's a lot of people in this state that'll ride around with the Georgia G or Georgia Bulldogs tags or stickers on their truck, car, bus, whatever. And then you'll see somebody with a Georgia Tech, and if you pull up next to them at a light, they almost never look at you. They know. There's people that wear shirts around all the time that's got the Georgia emblem on it. It says, "We run this state." It's a matter of pride. Yes, Georgia Tech's based in Atlanta, largest city in Georgia, but Athens is where the football team lives. So it's pretty intense. We enjoy it.
So now that I'm looking at the scores, I do remember the last time Georgia Tech won 28-27 over Kirby Smart in his first season. So I took a shot at 8 to 9 years ago, but it was actually in 2016. Kirby Smart's first team lost to Georgia Tech 28-27. Mark Richt lost to Georgia Tech twice in, what was he there, 15 years, 01 through 15. So that's 13-2 for Mark Richt against Georgia Tech. So that's what we've had recently.
Now, if you go back to the 98, 99, and 2000 seasons, Georgia Tech won those 3 games in a stretch. And I believe we were ranked 17th, 20th, and 18th. Georgia Tech was ranked 17th, 20th, and 18th. So, back then the teams were really solid. But, since then it's pretty much been all Georgia. There's a couple other a couple of other YouTubers out there that follow Georgia Tech, and those guys, it's very difficult to get them to have a conversation with me about the teams and being objective. Recently, Georgia Tech did make a transition in the head coach. They got a new head coach, and they're trying to get that program turned around. If you're an ACC fan, now is a great time to get that turned around because overall the conference seems to kind of be on a little bit of a downswing. So if they can get it up and running now, they're in a place where they can perform great recruiting. A lot of great players come out of the the Georgia area, the Mariettas, the Sandy Springs. You know, a lot of Bartow County, a lot of quality players in the state of Georgia, and they keep going everywhere but Georgia Tech.
Big Dog Brett, check him out here on YouTube, tracking the Georgia Bulldogs as they head to the SEC championship game after a little scrimmage against the Yellow Jackets. Brett, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.